You're listening to Pacific Mornings on 531 PI. I'm William Toretti. It's great to have your company this Wednesday. Look, let's get straight into politics now. Joining me is Prime Minister Christopher Luxon. Good morning to you.
Good morning, William. Good to be with you.
Sometimes interview questions write themselves, and I'm glad you brought up the treaty because I want to go there now. In terms of the hīkoi that is currently taking place at the moment, I believe passing through Auckland at the moment, what do you make of the hīkoi? We had Seymour on the show yesterday, perhaps suggesting that it was kind of a rent-a-crowd moment in terms of there are multiple people saying they're there for multiple reasons. But at the end of the day, the biggest and most vocal complaint is to the treaty principles bill. What's your thoughts on that hīkoi?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's, I understand, I talk with Māori leaders privately, and I meet with them in small groups as well. And I meet with them in public settings, and I understand the frustration and how Māori are feeling around the Treaty Principles Bill. My view, as you know, is that we're in an MMP environment that requires compromise. Coalition governments have to be formed under our political system, as it is in Western Europe. You have parties that have a lot of alignment in some areas and then don't unaligned in other areas. We believe very strongly in the National Party. That's why I'm saying we will support it to first reading, but we're not going to vote against it in the second reading, and it won't become law. But the point is, and I know that people don't, they say, well, why do we have to do it? Well, we have to do it because we're in a coalition and parties have their things that they're important to them. So ACT doesn't get what they want. I don't get what I want. But the reality for us is that we think actually our approach is a better approach, that you don't take 200 years of treaty and actually simplify it down to a treaty principles bill that at a stroke of a pen changes everything about that, when in fact you're better to engage with it and work through issue by issue. It doesn't mean you're always going to agree on those issues, Māori and the Crown, but actually we need to be able to work our way through those issues.
Because of your business acumen, though, surely during the negotiating, that could have been negotiated better to just completely scrap the idea.
Well, again, it's the issue that took the longest to negotiate, because it was the thing that, from my point of view, as I said in the election, we had we were just not interested in the Treaty Principles Bill. We didn't support it as a national party beforehand. For ACT, they want a full-scale national referendum and to run it through the Parliament under three. We have to go to the Parliament what are called three readings for a bill to become a law, and then take it out to the public for a full referendum. We just don't think it's a simplistic approach to a very complex set of challenges. The treaty sets up a dynamic in New Zealand where the Crown needs to meet its obligations under the treaty and also need to ensure there are equal rights for New Zealanders. And that puts tension into the system. But the way to deal with that tension is not to come out with a very simplistic bill that actually, at the stroke of a pen, invalidates almost 200 years of progress.
I mean, why even bother then? Why not just do what the opposition's saying and kill the bill? Because ultimately, it almost feels as though social cohesion in this country is at risk.
Well, I get that, but the system that the New Zealand people have chosen is an MMP system. Today in Parliament, you have six parties. They have six very different views of the world, and they have six different representations of New Zealanders that they represent. You can think about how a Green Party has moved to a much more socialist agenda. You've had a Te Pāti Māori that actually often talked about a very separatist agenda. You have an ACT that's a more libertarian party. You have New Zealand First that has its style as well. So, and you've got Labour and National in the mix of it. So the reality is, in an MMP system, as we see in Western Europe, where there are often four-party coalition governments, they take 300 days to negotiate an agreement. There are trade-offs and things that get done in the spirit of actually forming a government. This was one of the compromises we needed to make. And I get that people say, well, hang on, why couldn't you just do this or that? The point is, that is what the New Zealand people have asked and voted for several times, as an MMP system. And you will not, going forward, you have to form coalition governments. You can't have a first past the post mentality, where if it was all just left to the National Party only. We are in a coalition government. And therefore, genuinely, as MMP is maturing, you need to be able to reflect that parties will have different interests and they will have things that are different from each other that you have to be able to support in some form or another.
Just finally on the bill, do you think this will be the thing to kill the coalition? I mean, Seymour doesn't mince his words when he's talking to the media about this, in terms of he has not ruled out, pulling out.
Well, I mean, I don't think it will be. I think we've been very clear in our coalition agreement. He didn't get what he wanted, which was a full-scale national referendum. He's getting a first reading and a select committee process where public can air their views in through the parliamentary select committee. And then the bill will come back to the parliament and it will get voted down because the National Party will be voting it down. And unless an opposition party decides to support it, it won't be going through. And the other thing I'd say is that, we have quite a lot of maturity around this. The vast majority of the three parties in the coalition agreement are very united on rebuilding the economy, restoring law and order, delivering better public services. We have huge agreement on this. So there hasn't been a big, shouting, ranting, raving, moment inside our government. We just understand we have differences here and we respect those differences, even if we don't like them.
The government's Treaty Principles Bill has passed its first reading in Parliament, with Act Leader David Seymour's legislation facing heated opposition yesterday. Now, MPs who opposed the bill described it as being divisive, a wrecking ball to Crown Māori relations, and amounting to a dictatorship of the majority. The Labour MP Willie Jackson was booted from the debating chamber after he called Seymour a liar, and later a haka led by Te Pāti Māori saw proceedings suspended before the vote could be finished. Joining me to discuss the bill from a human rights perspective is the Human Rights Commission's Julia Whaipooti. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Morning, thank you for having me.
Before we crack into it, what do you make of the bill in itself?
The bill really presents some incorrect, misleading positioning around what te tiriti is in this country. It's a really something that we don't support from the Commission at all. It's not something that is very useful. It's unworkable and in breach of many human rights positions for us as a country. I think, as you described earlier, how it's been described by some MPs is really reflected in what we're seeing across the country in terms of it encouraging unuseful, incorrect information and being divisive in terms of how people are approaching this.
What do you make in the way in which Seymour's conducted himself with this bill? To his point, and it's the point he's been driving ever since this bill came to fruition, was that he wants us all to be one, for us all to be equal at the end of the day. On one side of things, I can hear where he's coming from. It's very aspirational, but on the other as well, you cannot diminish the rights of Indigenous people.
Well, when we look at te tiriti o Waitangi, it's really a place of belonging for all people in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and recognising the rights for all people who are on this land on it is the founding constitutional rights document here for us. And so it is a place that really should be seen as something that gives us all something to belong to. So when he talks about it all being one, or being universal, I think that comes from a particular worldview, and it really diminishes the rights that are promised to all New Zealanders under te tiriti o Waitangi. Recognising the rights of Indigenous people and Indigenous rights, as is promised in te tiriti o Waitangi to tangata whenua and Aotearoa, really recognises the responsibilities that already existed for Māori and tangata whenua in terms of respecting, belonging, the right to self-determination, the right to tino rangatiratanga over our culture, our taonga, and that doesn't diminish the rights of other people that are on this land. So it is something that we are firmly opposed to, the way that the bill is describing te tiriti as misleading, incorrect, and really inciting concerns that are too complex discussions that need to occur, but there's a wealth of education, a wealth of knowledge there. At the end of the day, te tiriti o Waitangi is about belonging for everyone on this land, and something we should all be proud of. And the way that this conversation is carrying out is not being led usefully at all.
That's right, and it's to my understanding, it's going to a select committee process of 6 months, which is just extraordinarily long. And, I believe Willie Jackson yesterday in his speech said it's going to be 6 months of a hate tour. And it's hard to kind of disagree with that. What do you make of just the way that this whole thing has transpired?
Absolutely. I think it is not a helpful way to encourage discussion and education around te tiriti o Waitangi. It's something that, as the Human Rights Commission, we would encourage. How do we have meaningful and genuinely educational discussions around te tiriti o Waitangi? What we see is that most New Zealanders support most New Zealanders support Te Tiriti o Waitangi being a partnership between Māori and tangata tiriti, so everyone else who are not tangata whenua. But what this process does really incites the sharing of misinformation, and what is in this bill incorrectly outlines actually what Te Tiriti o Waitangi stands for, and the 184 years of jurisprudence that we have in this country in terms of around what Te Tiriti actually means, what the promises are under that. Encouraging 6 months with the way that the discussion has been led through the bill and the way that it has been incorrectly outlined by this coalition partner is really concerning. And as a commission, we encourage meaningful discussions in education and around complex issues. And we think around what does it mean to have constructive and educative discussions around things that may not be well understood. And this process is not one of those. To put it in here, there's a power imbalance in terms of the Crown, resourcing of select committee in terms of who affords and accesses sort of voice around the submission. We want the correct sharing of information and the real I suppose, miri of discussion around Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and this process is not that. I mean, one of the recommendations we would immediately want to see is for this to be halted, for this process to be halted, but that's very different from halting public discussion about it and education about it, but it has to come from a good faith position, which in the way that this is leading out, it does not approach it in a good faith position at all.
Turn our attention away from Parliament into the hīkoi. It's a 9-day hīkoi that started at the top of the North Island to make its way to Parliament next Tuesday. Pretty extraordinary scenes in terms of the sheer number of people of all races, ironically, to the point of David Seymour, in support of Toitu Tiriti. I just want to stick with that whole situation with the hīkoi. Do you think, and this is what I put to the Prime Minister earlier this week, is this bill, in your perspective, destroying social cohesion in this country at the moment? Because it is utterly divisive.
It is affecting our social cohesion in this country, and the Prime Minister himself has spoken about it being divisive. I think the way that it is playing out, the sharing of disinformation and corrective information around what Te Tiriti o Waitangi is creating issues in how we relate to each other, issues in understanding as people in New Zealand. Like Te Tiriti o Waitangi is something we should be proud of. It's something that all New Zealanders should be proud of, that we belong in this country. It's our founding constitutional and human rights document here. It's something that should give us all a sense of belonging. And the way that the kōrero and the rhetoric has gone out has really encouraged divisive ways of relating to each other, which are incorrect and not helpful, and undoing generations of work of not just Māori, but tangata tiriti on this land, tangata moana, tangata Pākehā, Asian whānau, people from all around the world who stand on this land, and rights come from Te Tiriti o Waitangi to be on this land and to relate to each other it's been undone in the way that this has been spoken about so incorrectly. So the way you're seeing it in the mobilization of people as part of this hīkoi, it's not just Māori, it is tangata tiriti in their thousands, standing up and saying, hey, we stand from this land, we stand in support of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and what is playing out right now is not a reflection of how we want to relate to each other.
Yes, certainly. And look, just very quickly, just before we wrap up, I just want to did you see, I don't even know if you can talk to the specifics of this, but I want to try and get your reaction anyway, dare I ask. Hana Rafti Maipi Clark yesterday in the House, ripping the bill and then performing a haka. I thought it was pretty moving and pretty powerful. And I think it speaks to the way and the sentiment that Māori feel at the moment. What did you make of it?
I thought it was powerful, it was impressive, and it was an expression of tino rangatiratanga for her in her role in the kāwanatanga. She's been really clear that she's a mokopuna. As someone who is Māori, I mean, Papa Moana often spoke, when he talked about to first-year lawyers who are Māori, are you a lawyer who happens to be Māori, or you're a Māori who happens to be a lawyer? And the way that she presented herself, I would say she's holding herself as a Māori who happens to be an MP and standing in that light and speaking to many of our people who are frustrated by the use of this tool, by the use of Parliament to put this bill through, and the exclusion of our voices and our rights. So a big mihi to Hannah and what she represents, because not just her as an individual, but it's a people and a movement, but to all New Zealanders really looking to that, something we should be proud of, our rights to speak, our rights to hīkoi, our rights to be heard, and she expressed that strongly. And I think internationally, that is something that is recognised and that we are celebrated for in Aotearoa. We are celebrated for our culture, and that our strong sense of Māori culture, and that's something that I think this government is hearing from this hīkoi and from the expression that Hannah did there as a representation of many.
Yes, no, I certainly agree. I'm going to play devil's advocate now, just for sheer balance. In terms of Seymour, his perspective on it is, perhaps, we need to relook, and it's not just with the Treaty Principles Bill, it's kind of what he's been pushing ever since the coalition came to be, in terms of Māori having certain rights over others. What do you say to that kind of sentiment, and is he right there?
Recognition of Indigenous rights does not remove rights from anyone else in New Zealand. What is promised under Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and I think it's one of the greatest gifts that Māori gave, the rangatira that signed the treaty back in 1840, was to give permission to settlers at the time, which were far, far less, there was 2,000 on the land at that time, give permission to the Crown to govern their own people on our land. Now, that relationship, it was a recognition that there'd be an ongoing relationship on this whenua, and it's a place that people need to belong. So there's recognition that Māori continue to have the responsibility and the role to govern over our own culture and taonga, and responsibility to the land and the things that we protect. That did not diminish rights to anyone else. It acknowledges rights that already existed and continue to exist. So yes, that is wrong. It is wrong to assert that recognising the rights of Indigenous people and in this land of Māori takes away from others. Really, it's something to be proud of. It strengthens who we are as a country. I spoke about internationally how we are recognised, upheld. We go to the Olympics. Our culture is on display and celebrated, but you do not cherry pick which parts you want to celebrate. I think it's something we should all be proud of as New Zealanders, and the way that he's spoken about it is incorrect and harmful.
Should we ever get to a point in this country, or perhaps not, where we do become what Seymour aspires New Zealand to be, where we are all one, and at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that we're all human, set aside your cultural differences? Or do you think that's just bland?
I mean, when you say it's bland, what culture is he talking about? Because everyone has culture. And so when he talks about that, we are all one, he is not talking, if we were all one as Māori, would that be okay? So it's actually what is behind that language, and recognizing the things that connect us and bind us, and also the strengths and our differences is something to be celebrated. So this approach, the kōrero around that, to say we are all one, is causing harm, and it's actually deleting other cultures, and it's talking about preserving power and structures in the way that things currently are. And I think it's a really harmful and dangerous discussion and rhetoric to be sending. And also, again, coming back to Te Tiriti being something that belongs to us all, that gives us standing and belonging to us all in Aotearoa, something to be proud of. And this language is divisive and harmful.
It is 8:32 a.m. You're here on Pacific Mornings, 5:31 PI with Kalia Strong. A national hīkoi is currently underway to take a stand against ACT's Treaty Principles Bill. The hīkoi began in the far north town of Te Kao and is due to arrive at Parliament on the 19th. Travellers from Bluff at the far end of the South Island are also travelling towards Wellington to join the North Island group. ACT Party Leader David Seymour joins us live now for reaction. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Minister. What do you make of this hīkoi? Are the concerns with the treaty bill not valid?
Well, it's a couple of things. I have been watching what they're saying, and they've been pretty open about the fact that they're not only protesting against the treaty principles bill, there even seem to be people there with concerns about Gaza, apparently part of the movement. But to answer your question about the treaty principles bill, I think what's clear is that the treaty principles bill does not take away anyone's rights. It doesn't stop anybody speaking their language or practicing their culture. What it does do is it says these principles of the treaty, what are they? Parliament in 1975 said there were principles, but no elected Parliament has ever actually passed a law to say what the principles are. And I think that needs to be finished as a job. I think that the principles I'm proposing are actually good for everybody, and there's only three of them. One is that the government has the right to govern. Two is that the government has a duty to protect the rights of Maori that they had in 1840, but actually it has a duty to protect the rights of everybody. And finally, that the government should uphold equal rights for all people. Now, I challenge people to say what objection they have to those three ideas. The government has the right to govern, it has a duty to uphold all of our rights, and that everyone's rights are equal. Those are pretty positive things, I would have thought. So my challenge is to people to say, well, what exactly is wrong with that?
Yeah, I can understand, from the outside, this all sounds very reasonable. Do you believe this is the platform to work these things out? And have you received, consultation, advice from iwi on this matter before bringing it to Parliament?
Well, I've received advice from a lot of people. Some of them are iwi, some of them are not. But I think part of the reason I'm doing this is that we've got into a mindset that there is two sort of standards of being a New Zealander. If you're tangata whenua, then you have a special place. You're in a partnership with the Crown. If you are not, then you get called things like tāiwi or tangata tiriti, and that you sort of have a different role in society. In fact, that's what some of the hīkoi organisers have said, is that the treaty gives permission for everybody else in New Zealand to live here. And I think that if you ask most people who either were born in this country or legally immigrated here, they'd say, this is the only country I've got. I'm a fully equal citizen with the same rights and duties as everyone else. And I think if we could just get back to that way of thinking, it would be much easier to solve so many of the serious problems we have around health and housing and education and the economy and getting more jobs, building more roads and so on. At the moment, everything we do starts with, have you asked iwi? Well, actually, I think we should just be equal citizens in a country that's the only one we have.
Now, Minister, the principles have been, condensed into a 3-page document. Now, this doesn't sound as controversial as it's being made out. Has the media coverage been fair or too reactive on this?
Well, there's lots of different media, and I think, while people say there's lots of trouble with media, I think there's some good and there's some bad. I'm very grateful for this conversation on Twitter, on Pacific Mornings. I think some of the coverage that has been done by TV1, for example, has been pretty interesting. I noticed that an interview I did on TV1 has been viewed probably over 500,000 times online. And I don't think people are watching it because they thought it was a good interview. I think they're watching it because they're astonished at the line that the interviewer took. So there's certainly been examples of media who I don't think are really asking themselves, am I being fair to all of my audience members? Instead, they're giving one line, which is, what do certain spokespeople within Māoridom think, rather than what do all people think. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this bill. We need to get back to equal rights.
Now, your coalition partners have both broken rank and said they're not going to support this further. So it begs the question, what's the point? Why are you going through with this, and why not just give up on it now?
That's a fair question. I think the answer to that, in a way, is if it's not going anywhere, why are so many people, so desperate to stop it going anywhere? The truth is that even if it only gets read once in Parliament and then goes off to a select committee and everyone has an opportunity to give their opinion on it through the select committee process, that is a big change, because for too long the treaty has been something that, well, if you're not an expert, if you're not Maori, if you're not the right sort of person, then you can be told that you don't deserve an opinion, you don't know what you're talking about, maybe even people will say, oh, you're racist. We've got to stop that. We've got to make it a document that is owned by everybody. That's what the Treaty Principles Bill does. Even if it doesn't go all the way, it still starts that conversation. And I think the reason that so many people are desperate to stop it going anywhere, even though they say it's not going anywhere, but they're still trying to stop it, is because they know as soon as you say we all have a right to have a say, that changes the whole debate.
Wouldn't you argue it's racist to continue the current system where we have certain sectors of society doing a lot better than Māori and Pacific in the statistics?
Well, I think what's important is to look at each person for all of their characteristics. So you're certainly right that if your view of the society is you divide people up by their races and you average out those groups, then yes, you will find that Māori and Pacific have lower averages than a lot of groups. You'll also find that Asian New Zealanders typically have higher averages for education and income and so on than other groups, and European New Zealanders somewhere in the middle. So you can do that exercise if you'd like. But my question is, why start with race? Why is that the way that you divide people up in the first place? Because if you look more closely, you'll see that there are some Māori people doing very, very well. I whakapapa Māori. I don't feel like I need a lot of help at this point. There'll be other people who are not Māori who actually have really big challenges and need a lot of help. And I would just say that, what's truly racist is when the lens you look at people through is, well, first of all, what's your ethnic background? Then I know how to think about you. Stereotyping and grouping people like that used to be called prejudice or, bigotry or discrimination or racism, all those things. I thought we were against that. So I'm interested in how do we get better education? How do we get more homes built? How do we get more jobs? How do we raise wages? But I don't just want to do it for one race, or I don't want to do it for people based on their race. I just want to do it for everyone who's in New Zealand.
Yeah, how do you think this bill's going to help our Pacific and Māori kids? Or, the end goal, is this going to be improvement for our Māori and Pacifica peoples?
Yeah, it is, because I take a wider view and a longer view of history, and I ask myself, where in the world have kids, no matter what their background, had more opportunities to get an education, get a job, get a home, have a family, do the things that make them happy. And overwhelmingly, it's societies that are based on equal rights, the rule of law, no matter who you are. It's what you do in life and the opportunities that you take that make a difference. That's a success, whereas if your starting point is the way that the treaty has been defined in the last 30 or 40 years, that it's a partnership and everything's about what happened in the past and, your future is almost decided 200 years ago, then you take away that dynamism and that excitement that you get when you say, look, everyone's got challenges, everyone's got choices, but you start from basic universal human rights. Everyone's equal before the law. Let's see what we can do to have a bit of fun in life and make this the greatest country on earth.
Appreciate your time, Minister. That was ACT Party Leader David Seymour for reaction on the Treaty Principles Bill. You have a good day.
Thank you.
It is 20 minutes until 9 o'clock. You're listening to Pacific Mornings on 5:31 PI for your Wednesday. I'm William Teresi. It's great to have your company if you're just joining us. Now we're going to turn our attention back to the Treaty Principles Bill. Now, earlier there in the show, we had Prime Minister Christopher Luxon and his view on it. Ultimately, his thoughts were it's a coalition agreement and they must see it through, at least through the first reading. But we turn our attention to it because there is also a nationwide hīkoi taking place today too. And in fact, it'll be leading its way to Parliament. Joining me to discuss this and more is former lawyer Lisa Meto Fox. Good morning to you.
Te amanawea, William.
Hey, thank you so much for your time. Look, we'll crack straight into it. In terms of getting an understanding of the bill from your perspective, an explainer perhaps.
Sure. Yeah, essentially what David Seymour and the ACT Party are trying to do is rewrite the principles of the treaty. So in 1975, the Treaty Waitangi Act became law, and what it did was create the Waitangi Tribunal and create the three Ps, protection, participation, and partnership, which are the commonly referred to treaty principles at the moment. And what David Seymour is trying to do is rewrite those principles through this bill, and also, many would argue, rewrite the treaty itself.
With all that view in mind, how do you think this treaty principles bill would affect Māori?
Well, it's as the Waitangi Tribunal has said, Māori would feel the brunt of the social disorder and division. So what's been really clear from National and New Zealand First is that they aren't going to support this into law. They're only going to support it through the first reading, and not through the second reading. And in order for it to become law, it would need to be supported through all three readings. So it's clear that it's not going to become law. But what the kind of purpose, I think, of the bill is to drive division between Māori and the rest of New Zealand society. And so what the Waitangi Tribunal are talking about is that although it might not become law, the discussion and the 6-month select committee process, and I was thinking about this, 6 months for a select committee process is very long. If we think about the committee process for the restoring New Zealand citizenship to Samoans, we had, I think it was about 1 day in Auckland and then maybe 1.5 days in Wellington, so 2.5 days. This is getting 6 months. It's going to be a real beacon for those who are anti-Māori, who feel that Māori have too many rights, that the treaty has gone too far. And so although it's not going to become law, it is going to be, and we can see that already, it's hugely divisive. It's tearing at the social fabric of our nation.
That's a really good point. And I was talking about it this morning in my opinion piece in terms of it almost feels like social cohesion in this country is at an all-time low. Obviously, with the hīkoi that's taking place today. I'm going to play devil's advocate now, putting my devil's advocate hat on. Now, David Seymour on the show yesterday said, look, it's not going to stand on anyone's culture, their language, or celebrating their culture. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I watched David Seymour's interview yesterday, and I think it's so interesting, right? Because when he spoke to you guys and when he speaks in the media, he speaks in this kind of monotone and he sounds so reasonable. And it's, well, I'm just wanting to clarify what the principles of the treaty are. But when you really drill down into it, and, I was looking at the Act bill rather last night and, obviously reading some of the commentary, and it's like, no, that's just not true. You know exactly what you're doing. You know that you're creating a symbol for those who are feeling that their privilege is being taken away, which is completely incorrect. And I suppose those on the right who, as a Māori friend of mine put it, think that those Maoris need to be put back in their place. That's what some people on the right genuinely think. And this is a real beacon and a symbol for those people to come out and to feel emboldened to share those opinions.
To David's point, though, is there not, and it's not something to aspire to for our country and indeed the world, for us all to be one? And I fully concede, though, that at least for Māori, Pacifica, we are disadvantaged. We are overrepresented in too many stats. So, of course, we're not equal when you look at it in that perspective. But should we not aspire to all be one? Human race prevails above all.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just not true, right? Like we can, as Pacific people, we can look at the suburbs that we live in. We can look at the schools that we generally go to, our workplaces. We are divided a lot along socioeconomic and ethnicity lines, and saying otherwise that, well, we should just pretend that we're all one. And, as David Seymour puts it, that we need to base everything on need and not ethnicity or race is just not dealing with the world that we live in, the unequal society that is created largely by colonisation, both here in Aotearoa, but also we can see that in the Pacific.
Mm. And one more question, and then I will take my devil's advocate hat off, I swear. In terms of, is there a victim mentality to all of this as well, though? Should we not be shifting and moving away from, say, our past?
Yeah, and I hear David Seymour, and he keeps kind of saying almost like, well, it was 200 years ago, and yes, it's been breached many times, and it's obviously 180 years ago, but kind of get over it. And I think, well, imagine if the government said to Pacific communities, the Dawn raids were 40, 50 years ago, just get over it. Or they said to Samoans, well, the stripping of your New Zealand citizenship was 80 years ago. That was your grandparents' generation. Get over it. How would we feel? We know that those historical wrongs have consequences that we live with today as the Pacific community, and it's the same for Māori.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point raised. All right, hats off now. Let's talk about the hīkoi today. And it's a pretty moving movement, for lack of a better phrase. I mean, you've got people that are out there and they're marching the length of the country ultimately and converging on Parliament on the 19th, I believe. What do you make of that movement and that groundswell of pushing back against this not only this bill, but perhaps divisive government?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. I think that it's crucial that we show this government that, any moves to push back and to take the nation back, the progress that's been made over the last 40 or 50 years will not be tolerated. And I think it's brought a lot of people together, including Māori and Pacific. And obviously we have a history of kotahitanga, unity and solidarity through movements like Ngā Tamatoa and the Panthers, and the Mao movement and Māori leaders, but also more recently in Ihu Mātao. So I know that I've heard some, I suppose, commentators on the right, if I can put it that way, say, oh, well, it's not even going to become law, so kind of calm down. But I think, it's important that we very firmly say, no, this is not acceptable. And I think that it is, as you mentioned, other actions as well. So it's, the current government have decided to roll back New Zealand history being a compulsory part of the New Zealand education system, which I think was one of the greatest things that the previous government did, because I think so many people in New Zealand, Aotearoa, really don't understand the history of colonisation of this country and the impacts that we very much live with. But there's also the Treaty Clause Review that the New Zealand First Party are conducting. So that's where they go through all the legislation that's coming through for amendments or new legislation, and they take out any references to treaty principles. And then there's also the Marine Coastal Area Bill. So that's essentially the Foreshore and Seabed Act happening all over again. So there's many, many instances, not just the Treaty Principles Bill, where the current government really are trying to roll back the progress of our nation for the past 50 years.
Certainly. Yeah, I hear that point. I mean, again, I'm just going to ask one more time, and the hat's back on. And I'm not that I'm showing political stripes in any means, as I always jump between two sides anyway. But again, like, should we not be aspiring to be one at the end of the day?
I mean, I think we're a multicultural society, and that's a really beautiful thing. And I think when I hear that kind of we should be one, it makes me think about assimilation. And I'm personally not interested in that. And I think most people in Aotearoa really value the fact that we are multicultural, a diverse society, a liberal democracy, and that we aren't all just one particular kind of person. So I have to say, no, I don't think that we should all be aspiring to be one. I think that would be a really boring and less dynamic and less beautiful place to live.
No, well put, well put. Hey, thank you so much for your time. That is former lawyer Lisa Meto Fox. You have a good rest of your day, and thanks for coming on.
Malo William, thank you.